Great, and then we'll move to item 14. And we've got the Mayor back who can take the chair for item 14.
Hello.
Okay, so Pauline, do you want to introduce this item?
Sorry, I wasn't going to remember whether you were voting.
That's all right. So we've just done 13, let's start 14, which is Heathcote.
Do you want to take your...
Oh.
Yeah. Pauline, would you like to do a quick introduction, or...?
Yeah, sure. Should I do that before you... Yeah. Okay, so the floodplain management options for the Opawaho Heathcote. So as we all know how challenging the issues of flooding are in the Heathcote, but it's because it's a linear issue, and the river channel has narrowed in some places due to the earthquakes, causing slumping of the banks, liquefaction, silt build-ups, but also land has risen at the estuary, which reduces the flow. So the upper Heathcote storage basins are part of a solution, and that was part of a solution, as Councillor Scandrett alluded to earlier, which was originally recommended by the Drainage Board in 1985, and that's just one of them. To date, the Land Drainage Recovery Program has fast-tracked these 4 storage basins and are now working on implementing a stronger time frame. So the time has been required to arrive at these recommended treatments, but they'll bring benefits from their combination. There's no one single treatment that will be the cure-all. And if you look at the table on page 236, you'll see the myriad of options there that have been investigated, and it shows that many have been considered and discounted or recommended for either implementation or for more work via a feasibility study. But because these are big and time-consuming projects, we're also recommending the flooding intervention policy be applied in order to give people more chance of insurance and peace of mind. So once again, this was supported by the ITI Committee, and our recommendations will be up on the screen shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to present the...
Yes, thank you.
The presentation?
So, as we all know, the Heathcote flooding is a historic issue. It's one that the city has wrestled with for decades and was a problem for the Drainage Board. The Drainage Board did do a lot of work, but they also had a lot of work that wasn't implemented. Things got hard, they got into the too hard basket. Since the earthquakes, things have got worse. There's no denying that. We have residents who have claimed that they've been flooded 4 times since the earthquakes, and I think this morning was saying it's been flooded 3 times. So this has always been a problem, but it's that much more real now. It's that much worse. And of course things will get worse in the future with climate change. But the problem at the moment is real. The risk is significant. Over 200 homes, over 200 families are at risk of an extreme event. I just want to clarify what we mean by extreme. Because if we look back at the flooding we had this year, that was not an extreme event. That was a frequent flooding event. If we look back to 2014, that still wasn't an extreme event. That was more of a medium event, but still within the frequent flooding category. And as was alluded to earlier, these things are only going to become that much more common. So the solutions are complex, they're difficult, and they are expensive. But they're not going to get any easier or cheaper if we wait. There is no silver bullet, there's no single solution. That's one of the reasons why it's been difficult to progress in the past. So what we have is a team worked very hard in building up a package of measures that work together to give something that can return the Heathcote at least to pre-quake flood risk levels, and in many cases better than that. This is an opportunity for a step change, this recommendation, one that sits in front of you. We do have a short presentation. It's a complex issue, but I think Peter has a short presentation that brings out the key facts and hopefully keeps it simple. Thank you.
Okay, well I'll go through this very quickly because I think many of these points have already been made. we're talking here about the earthquake effects of flooding, frequent flooding upstream of Radley Street. And the reason why we're looking at upstream of Radley Street is the area downstream is primarily impacted by sea level rise and is being looked at by the multi-hazard study, of which has been presented here before. As Keith said, some houses have been flooded 4 times above floor since the earthquakes, and there's an increase in vulnerability to both frequent and extreme flooding. In terms of the numbers, as you've heard this morning, there's a story behind each number. It's very easy to put up on the screen a number like 7 or 24. But that represents obviously 7 or 24 unique stories of what's happened in someone's lives and their livelihoods. And I must say that's what really drives and motivates our team, that it's actually about delivering these outcomes to the community that are affected. There's been a severe increase in the levels of houses, numbers of houses at risk of frequent flooding, the likes of which we saw in July this year, from 7 to 24, but we know from the actual flooding too that there's actually a number greater than 24. The model flooding shows a certain amount, but we also corroborate that against actual flooding, and I'm sure we use that data as well. So these floods are not extreme. These are the likes of which could occur several times in any one decade. But as Keith said, there's also the extreme flooding, and we need to keep in mind this. Post-earthquake, we now have over 200 houses at risk of flooding above the floor in an extreme event. And this is the likes of an event of which probably none of us in this room have ever seen, and would likely make national, if not international media. And so we need to be mindful of both addressing this frequent flooding but also this extreme flooding. And the number there has shown that the number has increased by about 47 houses, but within that 222 there's actually 101 new houses at risk that weren't at risk prior to the earthquakes. So there's been a real significant increase in the numbers affected as a result of the earthquakes. So our objective is to restore to at least pre-earthquake flood risk. And to do that with a complex problem like the Heathcote, we want to break it down into manageable building blocks. So we're looking at storage, and there's a significant amount of storage being added. It's over 800,000 cubic metres of additional storage being added, and that's over and above the schemes which are already planned and were planned pre-earthquake. And just referring back to one of the first public items about the water quality in the Opawaho Heathcote, these storage schemes not only will provide significant benefit to flooding, but they'll also provide significant benefit to water quality as well. So essentially using that same space to provide for water quality treatment at the same time. There's very little additional cost, and we're working to ensure that we're meeting 2 objectives there. So that's I think there'll be a really significant change in water quality in the Heathcote as a result of this as well. Dredging, as you heard through the petition this morning, is also very important. Essentially we have a river with very high sediment loads meeting the tide, which becomes slack and a lot of the sediment drops out. In a natural system that's fine, and the river will then find a new channel. With the houses and roads beside, there comes a point at which you need to make a decision. You either move the houses or you start to remove some of that material. And we've reached the point now where we're clear that this is the right decision to be made, that it does need to happen to ensure we increase the river capacity again. Of course, we need to be incredibly mindful of the ecological impacts of that, and we're working very hard with our ecologists and people like the Opawaho River Network and ECAN to ensure that we can do this with the minimal effect possible. Bank stabilisation, I'm including it here for completeness. This is actually already approved and funded by Council, and the first stage of this is out for consultation closing on this Friday. But this work is to, will have some benefit on flood risk by tapering the banks back, but it's primarily about fixing damage that occurred as a result of the earthquakes and also stabilising those banks to protect assets. As well as doing that, we're going to add a lot more planting to provide some shading of the river, whilst not also compromising capacity. The low stop banks, this is a slightly different option from the other ones. The storage, dredging and flood intervention policy are ones that we're recommending to proceed. This is a recommendation to keep investigating this, to assess further the technical feasibility, but also to consult with the community. In the public meetings, I've had discussions with people from very different sides. You heard this morning from Sheena that this is something they would like to see to address that frequent flooding of both underfloor and the roads, whereas other people are coming from a perspective of the impact it might be on their enjoyment of walking along the river and their enjoyment of the river. So we need to be mindful of both of those things, and that's why we want to have the opportunity to take it out for consultation, to understand where, as a council and a community, we sit on this issue. But that's primarily targeting frequent underfloor flooding and frequent flooding of access to people's properties. And we have heard of instances of people who have lost insurance due to frequent underfloor flooding, not even above floor flooding. So that's why we've got that option in there. And then the other one is the flood intervention policy, which I don't think I need to speak to, as we've just been talking about that. So together these really work together to provide a significant impact. And I can show you on this slide, this is the frequent flooding one. With storage or dredging alone, we can halve the number of the floors which are at risk post-earthquake. But with all options working together, these work to bring that down to none at risk in the current climate. People have alluded to earlier the fact that in the future the 1 in 50 year might become the 1 in 10 year, so it's not an issue that we can deal with once and it will go away forever. We need to keep focusing on the future plans. So what we're focusing on here is to ensure that what we're doing now can be built upon and will not compromise any options in the future. On the flood intervention policy, we are making a recommendation that it is implemented ahead or in conjunction with the storage and the dredging, rather than waiting for those things to be completed. And that relates to the question of timeliness. Some of these properties of households have flooded multiple times since the earthquakes, and the full benefits of the scheme won't be in place, won't be realised until we've got all of those elements in place. And because we're dependent on funding through the long-term plan for those, we can't really give any certainty as to how long that will take. And even if these schemes were in place, these houses would be the first to still flood in the next event, which is slightly larger than maybe a 10-year event. So they will still be the first to flood, and those with the most severe damage were a flood to occur. So it's for those reasons that we're recommending that it's implemented now. In terms of the extreme flooding, I think what we have here is a really good story. In terms of pre-earthquake, there were 175, and we know that went up with the earthquakes. We can drop that back quite significantly with the flooding, with the storage, and halve it approximately. But with all these options working together, we can actually bring the number that we estimate down to approximately 37, which is getting to a quarter or a fifth of the pre-earthquake level. So we think that's a really significant achievement and sets up the Heathcote really well to give a buffer to be able to look at that future flooding with sea level rise and climate change and so on. But as Keith said, it is really a step change in the risk to flooding along the Heathcote. So we're excited to be able to present this as this package of options as what that can achieve. So that's the Heathcote floodplain management options in a nutshell, and I'll open it to questions.
Thank you very much. Is this something that you want to move, Pauline?
Yes.
And seconded by Tim. So are there any questions for staff? Phil, Yanni.
Thank you for that explanation and the PowerPoint, Peter. Can I just ask you, just coming through perhaps from the submission today, was perhaps an indication that dredging may alone and may kind of like be one of the silver bullets, and you made it clear this is a package. But you've also, I think, referred in the report that in fact it might be some time, like several years, before in fact this combined program achieves the objectives that we set out. So just wondering if you could perhaps give us an indication of the timing for, I guess, completion of some of those options?
So it's difficult to talk to the time frame at the moment because it is funding dependent. The report refers to the previous LTP funding regime, and on that basis it was suggesting 3 to 4 years, depending on whether or not low stop banks become part of the option as well. So obviously with the LTP discussions, the questions are going to be, what's the affordability? Or, could it take longer? Could it take less? So that's obviously a separate debate for a different forum. But we've given an indication based on previous funding.
So besides there being no one solution, there isn't going to be even a combined quick fix. It's going to take quite some time.
It's an incremental fix. The dredging obviously benefits from storage. That lowers the levels and makes dredging more effective. So that's why these things work together and give a better outcome. But even with the storage basins as they come online, the one we've had online, that's reducing the risk slightly each time, but we don't get the full benefit until it's all completed.
Yanni?
A number of questions. I mean, thank you just to say thank you. I know you've been working hard on this and it's taken longer than I think any of us would have liked, but I know that it's complex, so I just want to acknowledge that. I just had some quick questions around Jackson's Creek. Is there a program of work around that that's included in this?
The work we're currently discussing today is around the main river stem, so not the likes of Jackson's Creek, and Bells Creek came earlier, of course. Jackson's Creek, yes, we've got an investigation underway there. There have been some repairs done and are more scheduled to be done. So we're looking at some of those immediate fixes, but we're then looking at it in terms of the wider context of flooding in that area as well. So that is underway.
So we'll just stick to the paper that we've got in front of us today, if that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a stem that goes off the river, but it was...
Yes, I know, but it's...
LDR, so,
Yes.
So, just Riselord Terrace, is it proposed for the lower stop banks along there?
Do you mean Riverlord Terrace?
Riverlord Terrace, sorry.
The Riverlord Terrace.
Yeah.
So yes, there is a proposal for low stop banks on some parts of that. Again, with the low stop banks, we'd only target those areas that we consider are the worst areas and can provide some benefit there.
Okay. In terms of the estuary, obviously there's been concern that the estuary's risen and it traps the water. Have you got any comment that you can make in regards to what problems the estuary is causing post-earthquake and what any process around looking at alleviating that is, other than the options that you've already put forward?
Yeah, so the estuary is a dynamic environment, of course, which is finding its new equilibrium post-earthquake. We have looked at the modelling for the area that we're talking about today, upstream of Radley Street, and we don't believe the estuary is having any significant effect on the flooding in those areas. Essentially what's causing the flooding there is the channel constriction, which is what the dredging is aiming to look at, as well as the bank stabilisation upstream. But the estuary is not driving, the bed levels in the estuary are not driving the flooding in this area.
Right. Just in terms of the time frame, similar to Phil's question, obviously it'll take some time to get the charts that you've shown us around the people who will realise the benefit. With the flood intervention policy for the Heathcote catchment, is there consideration to the fact that although someone might qualify at the end of all these improvement works, actually these improvement works may take 5 years or 6 years or 10 years, and therefore they would be considered eligible based on the time frame in terms of the associated works?
The numbers we've quoted of between 25 to 35, that is based on intervening now and not waiting for any of the schemes to benefit them. So that issue is taken care of, where our recommendation is that issue is taken care of for the very reason that some of the benefits might take a number of years to realise. So the 25 to 35 includes those who may benefit at the very end of these schemes being implemented.
Thank you for clarifying that.
David?
And just...
sorry.
Just one final question.
All
Thanks. Just in regards to one of the other community concerns that's been raised through the public meetings, and we've heard again from the deputation today, is the raw sewage overflows into the streets, into the houses, into the river. Can you just give us a snapshot of, obviously this is focused on reducing the flooding, but what work is going on around reducing those overflows in terms of and mitigating those sewage discharge issues?
Do we want
probably
David?
not best place to answer that.
We're doing quite a lot of work around there, but look, to get the detail, I think we'll have to direct it to other staff. Obviously, these are land drainage staff, wastewater, but we are doing a lot of work around that area, but I'm sorry, I haven't got the details with me at this point in time.
It is a key issue, so I think it might be worthwhile to have a report back on that.
Maybe put a resolution to that effect. I guess I was just trying to understand
I
if
don't
there was
know that it
improvements
needs a resolution.
we can do.
Pauline,
around
can you deal with it
the
in the
health.
context of the land drainage
Yes.
recovery program? I just really like to get a report back through your committee, either through ITI or through the land drainage recovery program, about the impact of the raw sewage, because I share the council's concern in relation to that matter. It is something that challenged us over in the east after the earthquakes, and it's pretty challenging on lots of levels. So I'd really like to have that report back, but I don't want to hold up the meeting today. We've got
That's
work to
fine.
get
I
on
didn't
with.
want to hold up the meeting either. I just wanted to ensure that if there was opportunities through the works that you're proposing to address some of that, recognising it's a different unit of council, that it would be incorporated.
Yeah, we'll get a report back through the ITI committee. David?
Thank you. Firstly, Keith, can I just congratulate you and your team for the amount of work you've put in on these catchments, and you know, you're not only doing work here, it's the Styx and the estuary edge as well, South Shore. Look, I'm curious about the dredging aspect, and chairing a community group out at Styx. We heard last night an extremely well presented report from Graham Harrington over flows, river levels, and dredging, and the impacts of weed cutting and the whole scenario. And it sort of seemed to me that, you know, like we've heard today, there's no silver bullet that you can go out there and do. But I'm wondering really, with the data on the Heathcote, like we heard last night on the Styx, whether in fact dredging will provide the sort of relief that you're looking for, or is it really synonymous with the storage capacity upstream? Because what I heard from the Styx catchment last night was that dredging had only made a minimal difference to river levels in the Styx. So is there any synergies between the two catchments and that sort of stuff we were hearing last night?
I can talk to that issue. The benefits of the dredging relate a lot to the grade of the river, so different rivers and the proximity to the high tide levels and so on. So different rivers will just respond differently to dredging. Looking at some of Graham's data for the Heathcote River, we can see sometimes with weed cutting a drop in water level of up to half a metre once that weed is taken out. So that gives you a bit of an indication of what we might also see with some of the slumping, the banks, liquefaction, bed deposits being taken out from the river as well. To test this, we've actually run a model run with an artificially low boundary downstream to see whether with the dredging what effect the tide will have, but we're still noticing a positive impact. So I think it's different from the Styx. We've got good data to demonstrate that it is going to have an effect. One thing we do say though is that will be a diminishing effect over time with sea level rise. As the sea level rises, that will then reduce some of that impact, but we don't know how long that will take. We believe that we'll be getting benefits for a good period of time before we need to reconsider that. But it is quite a different situation from the Styx in terms of both the Heathcote's quite constrained and also its relationship and interaction with the tide.
Great, thanks. And just the other a comment, I suppose. One of the drawbacks, I suppose, with the Styx was a wee bit of lack of data in some of the tributaries and some sections of the river. And I think post or during these works, I would encourage you to keep as much data on an ongoing basis. So that we can not only use this information to keep the Heathcote up to scratch, but it will be useful for other catchments analysis as well.
Absolutely.
The question that I had was in relation to the petition which recommended the installation of one-way check valves, and I've no idea what one-way check valves are, and have you got some comment in response to that?
Yes, I mean, I've actually met with Bruce at his home and seen the ponding which occurs outside of their house. What we do ask for residents is to, there are a number of check valves already in place. We believe we do have a sufficient number there, but some of these do malfunction over time, and we rely on residents plus also contractors' site visits to actually let us know when they aren't working. So that we can then either look at whether we need to replace those or install, do some maintenance on it. So I've passed the issues highlighted on to the operations team to address, but it is an ongoing thing that some of them need replacement with a more robust system, other ones just need some maintenance because something's stuck in there.
We might ask our Smart City program to maybe look at a sensor system that could let you know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe observing where there's water coming up through the gullies into the streets.
So we are working with our contractor to improve the inspections and the quality of those inspections so that we can have them dealt with quicker. The non-return valves, they open to let the water out, and then at high tide they close to stop the water coming back through again.
There are also some check valves that are suitable in some conditions and some and not in others. I mean, absolutely. The South Brighton ones or South Shore ones, although they're non-return, they really require a head of water to make them work effectively, and they're not getting that quite.
Different situation requires different products.
We need to be very cognizant of the fact of the right sort of valve in the right circumstance.
Yep. So I've just added a couple of. Oh, have you got another question?
Yeah, because it's one that's been raised a lot by the public, and it's around, are we under engineering our solution all the time, as in our river management? There's been flooding in that river forever, and then the Woolston Cut went in to fix that, and then people say that it just hasn't been dug out enough and the bank management has just not been enough. And will this just, because the Woolston Cut gave us a bit of catch up, and now we're behind the 8 ball again, and then of course there's been the suggestion of the gates at the head of the estuary, I think. Is that even a remote possibility or not? Because sea level rise...
Sorry, I kind of really want to focus on the recommendations that are in front of us, rather than suggesting that we open up another entire line of inquiry, which we actually ruled out last term.
It's also in that table on page 236 that I referred to. That's
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be, but it's 10 to 1 in the afternoon, and I would like to deal with the paper that's in front of us. We're just adding a couple of recommendations, picking up on Yanni's point. Invite the ITI committee to report back on interventions to prevent sewerage overflows affecting roads and properties during flood events, and then refer the petition received in the deputation by Bruce Kane and Sean Daly to staff to investigate and provide feedback to the petitioners, because I think your comments about what's happening in relation to the one-way check valves is actually quite a positive reinforcement of the role that local residents can play in terms of highlighting where things aren't working, but also to say that we've also instructed our contractors to do a slightly better job of alerting to, you know, or keeping an eye on them, making sure that they're functioning, and certainly double checking them at a time that a storm event is known to be coming is pretty important. All right, so that resolution's been moved and seconded. Yanni, Phil, Tim.
Oh, I just wanted to move an additional resolution as well. And number 4 is that we, and in response to the deputation that we heard around the concern around preparedness, that I think it would be good to ask the organisation for a formal review of the flooding response in July. It may already be happening, but that was one of the concerns that was raised this morning.
Could that be done through the committee? So Pauline's committee?
Because we've also heard around concerns around cleaning up as well, and I just thought it would be really good, like we've done with the tsunami warning system, to get an action plan to address it.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I thought there was one underway.
Yeah, so let's just follow up
I don't,
rather than have a specific resolution.
So do we want to note that there is a, that
I can't remember off the top of my head. I just wish you'd kind of, you know, sort of indicate these things.
Well, it came, we haven't had any time.
I don't think no specific resolution.
It came up this morning in the deputations, and I just thought it would be good to address
the thing is that I don't know whether we're doing one. I assume that we are.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Pretty sure we have.
Yeah.
Pauline's committee chased it up. Is that particularly appropriate?
I think we should just report back to you.
Well, why don't we invite the Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Committee to report back on the review of the last flood event that affected the Heathcote catchment and the Heathcote River catchment, sorry, and on interventions to prevent. So that way it's just simply noting that they'll report back on it.
And could you just add where it says to prevent also / clean up, because that was the other thing that was referred. Yeah. That would be really cool.
Well, isn't that something that'll come out of the review? I mean, it's just the different things that we're talking about there.
It's only a word, and clean up. It was mentioned a number of times.
And interventions to prevent sewage overflows affecting roads during flood events, and clean up where they occur.
Clean up, didn't you?
Yeah, it was just interventions / clean-ups to prevent sewage overflows affecting roads and properties. Just thought it was pretty simple.
Right, so Phil and then Tim.
And I just wanted to speak to it as well.
So, look, I think we're really pleased that we've reached this point. I think today with this report, it's quite a major milestone for us when we look back, say, at the time of the major flooding in 2014, and we had the Mayoral Task Force, and this is another extension of that. And I think it's really great, actually, that these solutions which are being put to us, they're not just hard engineering. They've clearly taken our people into account and the impact that the flooding has had on our people. And I guess it's fair to say today that we often hear people from the east part of the city concerned about sea level rise, and they come to us and tell us. And today I think we've heard really clearly that in fact that there's a huge impact on the people on the Heathcote River, but also just in terms of the ongoing effects of climate change and sea level rise. They're not just impacting on the coast, they're also impacting on the people who live in the suburbs, you know, right along not just the Heathcote River but also the Avon. So I think the options that are put forward are really great. I think they're a great combination. There's been a huge amount of work and science gone into this, and I think we're really lucky that we're actually in this position to be able to hopefully afford, through the long-term plan, a whole plan of action to make sure this recovery happens. And I think that the further option of investigating the low-level stock banks, I think that's really good. It's something that clearly individual communities will want to have a very clear say on before we arrive at a solution for that part. So I certainly commend all of these recommendations to Council.
Tim?
Thank you. Look, first of all, I'd like to thank the staff for the work they've done. It's been absolutely outstanding. And when some of my colleagues talked about going to the government in retrospect for funding, and when we work with our colleagues at ECAN to gain resource consents to dredge or bank stabilisation, we need facts to be based on to gain those as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So I want to thank you very much for the work you've done. I'd also like to thank the Infrastructure, Transport and Environment Committee for pushing this and their support for this, and Pauline, especially you, and also Mike Davidson as Deputy Chair for allowing me to attend and speak to the committee. So thank you very much to both of you. A number of things have been asked today, with one of them with regards to funding and timeframes. The facts of the matter are, we around this table are the ones that dictate and decide the funding and the long-term plan. No one else does that. We have the total control of that to I guess, a degree with priorities. I just want to remind you that this is not a nice to have. For these communities, it's a must-do. This has been hanging around since 1985, where it was identified by the Drainage Board. We have had a major event which has changed the playing field for the worse for these communities. So it is now time to give them security. So those questions asked with regards to the new government coming in and supporting and funding, etc., they are a lot more open, it seems, than the previous one. But with the factual information given by our staff and the work they've done, let's look at that in retrospect. Our communities, these communities on the Heathcote, need confidence and security that we are going to move forward today. So I want to thank and hope that you will all support this unanimously. The person that I would like to thank most today, though, is Sheena for coming in and sharing her family's story. And I'll stop there, but thank you.
Thank you. Yanni.
Thanks. Just to follow on from Tim and Phil, you know, I have been nagging staff for a number of years now to get these issues addressed, and you know, I know that it's been frustrating for you as much as some of us as elected members, as the local residents. I think what we learnt in July is just how complex this river catchment is with the tidal influence. So, you know, we have not done things as quick as I would have liked, but I understand that it's better that we actually do the investigation to come up with things that will work rather than put at risk a lot of funding for things that don't make much difference at all. So, you know, following the floods in 2014, the government made a number of comments, I think, critical of us as a city, saying that they were waiting for us to provide solutions before the government would act. We have provided a steady stream of solutions, and there's more that are being offered today, and I think that's good because it puts us in a strong position to go to government and say that this is definitely a post-earthquake situation that we're dealing with, and we expect you, as my colleague Councillor Livington has said, you declared a national emergency in Christchurch following the earthquake. You assumed a large number of decision-making that normally would reside locally, and you should have a commitment to help us address some of the issues that have been done. There was an irony around the huge amount of money that was spent on the tidal barrage investigation, and which amounted to very little real action on the ground to help those communities that needed the help. But today is about us actually doing something or giving a commitment to a community that we take their concerns and their issues seriously, that we are making a commitment to do something to alleviate the situation as best we can as a city, and I look forward to the results of this. I also appreciate that you will be going through the next step of what will be a very personal and probably at times a difficult conversation with individual residents around the flooding intervention policy. But I too, like my colleague Councillor Cotter, reflect on what was done in the Flockton area and the professionalism with which you did that. So, you know, I have no doubt that you will treat this in the same way, and that you will work through some solutions for individuals who have been incredibly stressed and frustrated at what's been going on. So I'm very happy to support this work. The final point I would make is that we should always be looking at how we can improve, and that's why I think reviews of these events are so critical. We've done reviews into the tsunamis, we've done reviews into the fires. I think it's really important that we constantly learn as these events happen, how we can be better prepared and better respond. And we'll never be perfect, but we should have a system of continuous improvement which will help us address the things that people are concerned about. Thank you.
No, I won't. I'm tempted, but I won't. Pauline, could you close the debate, please?
Yes, thank you. Look, as I said before earlier, we forget the flooding effects and distress and accompanying trauma and costs when it's not raining. So now's the time to implement these recommendations to mitigate the next event. It's not if, but when. And it's not that it will be big, but it's how big. And as Peter alluded to, we just don't know. We can expect anything. And also, as Peter said, behind every statistic and inside every graph are people. So staff have shown us today how aware and how sensitive they are to the fact that people's lives are incredibly adversely affected by their vulnerability, and I thank them for that. We've heard of an additional benefit that we'll see an improvement in the water quality of the Heathcote as a result of these works if approved today. I just want to talk about D for a second. I'd like to emphasise that as part of a low stop bank feasibility study, that detailed information is provided to us with regard to operational costs over time, as stop banks can be costly to maintain. We know too that none of these options will have an impact or prevent any future mitigation works, should any arise in the future or any future funding be available. So these works, if approved, will reduce the number of homes that will flood inside to around 37. And these may be sorted through the intervention policy that we've just approved. I'd like to recognise also, along with my other colleagues that have stated already, the high level of expertise and sensitivity we have in our staff on the land drainage recovery team. We're very fortunate, and so are the Christchurch residents. Engineers with feelings, engineers with empathy. This is a highly disciplined and diligent team who are incredibly good at presenting us with very technical, complex engineering information in a form that we lay people can understand. This report represents a massive, massive amount of work, months and months, and I want to recognise that and thank you on behalf of the vulnerable residents of the Heathcote and on behalf of the people of Christchurch who will enjoy the improved water quality of the river. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. Yes, unanimously. And thank you very much to all of the staff that have been involved. Right, okay, now it's just after 1 o'clock. What I'm going to propose, and I just would like people to concentrate just for 1 minute.